Everyone always says, read tons of screenplays. Now it's gotten to the point where people brag about how many scripts they've read. Don't get me wrong, there's a hell of a lot of value you can get from reading screenplays, but there's really only so many you can look at before saying, okay, I get it. The real value, of course, comes from actually writing over and over again. But beyond that, in maybe a how-to book, one subject that writers should be exploring is psychology, because this can help you make your characters more interesting and realistic. In fact, all non-fictional literature from every discipline can inspire all sorts of ideas in different ways of executing them. But psychology, in particular, is a very special subject for storytellers, as it helps us create characters that allow us to understand ourselves better, which can help us make our stories better. For instance, most of us have heard about the late 19th, early 20th century Sigmund Freud and know that his big ideas about human behavior being shaped by unconscious thoughts, memories, and urges. But as soon as you ask someone to explain his comprehensive psychoanalytic theory of the human condition, they shrug their shoulders because they don't know, or at least they think they don't know. In reality, his theory has been shoved down our throats within cinema for God knows how long. All of us intuitively know about this. Take his theory on the structure of the human mind. Remember that cartoon where an angel appears on the character's shoulder to convince them not to do something bad, only for a devil to show up on the other shoulder to convince them to do it? That's a visual representation of what Sigmund Freud believed to be the structure of our minds, which consists of the id, ego, and superego. The id, which is represented by the devil on the shoulder, is the primal unconscious part of our minds that seeks immediate satisfaction from instinctual urges and drives. The ego, which is represented by the character in the story and influenced by reality, tries to meet the desires of the id in a socially acceptable way. The superego, which is represented by the angel, is the moral conscience, influenced by societal rules and parents' ethical standards. We see the influence of Freud's theory in this classic cliché all the time, but it's present in more subtle ways within many other films such as The Lord of the Rings. Specifically, it's expressed in the relationship between Gollum, Frodo, and Gandalf. The id is embodied by the character Gollum, driven by his irrational, addictive desire for the ring, regardless of the consequences to himself or others. Frodo represents the ego. He understands the reality of the situation and the dangers of the ring. He does his best to balance his own temptation of using the ring, his id, with the greater good and his responsibility to destroy it, his superego. Gandalf, who serves as a wise guiding figure and stands for moral righteousness, represents the superego. He is the moral compass of the story, often pushing for actions that conform to a higher ethical standard. This can also be found in the movie Fight Club, where the protagonist's id is Tyler Durden, a character who acts out the protagonist's most primal desires and ambitions, free of societal constraints. On the flip side, the superego is represented by the protagonist's original rational persona that is restrained by societal norms and rules, and the ego can be seen as the internal conflict the protagonist experiences twisting these two sides. So it's clear that Freud's ideas were huge, not just in the world of psychology, but also in the world of cinema. However, he wasn't the only player on the block. An equally powerful leader around that time was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst named Carl Jung, who founded analytical psychology and invented an extremely powerful tool for writers to use when developing a dynamic ensemble that can get an audience to really connect with their stories. Of course, I'm talking about According to Carl Jung, our personas, or archetypes, within stories, characters, themes, mythology, dreams, and scenarios are constructs of the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is the highly developed structures of the unconscious mind, which are shared among beings of the same species across different cultures and epochs. I know. This sounds like voodoo magic. That's why he got a lot of criticism for his lack of academic rigor. In many ways, he was seen more as a philosopher rather than a scientist. Regardless, the archetypes he describes have been used in stories since the beginning of storytelling, as they actually do a great job of moving people. So while we don't have any proof that a collective unconscious exists, we do have proof that his archetypes work universally across every type of story. Let's start with the basic ones, which are very similar to Freud's structure of the human mind. First, there's the persona. This is the outward face we present to the world that conceals our real self. It represents our public image or how we are seen by others. The shadow represents our darker and unconscious self, which the conscious ego does not identify itself with. It comprises the traits and instincts we choose to reject or suppress. So think Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. His persona is this smart, suave, yuppie businessman, and his shadow is this sadistic serial killer. Then there's the animus. The anima represents the feminine aspects of a male, while the animus represents the masculine aspects of a female. The writers who created characters like Ripley from Aliens or Charlie from The Whale took advantage of the anima-animus dichotomy by integrating traits from opposite genders to make their characters deeper and more endearing. Ripley may be a beautiful woman, but she's also a fearless badass. Charlie may be a fat couch potato like the stereotypical male, but he's also a man with deep emotional feelings and empathy towards others that he's not afraid to show. Finally, there's the self. This archetype symbolizes the unified unconsciousness and consciousness of an individual. In other words, this is the archetype that a main character typically embodies after they complete their mission or goal. They start with a philosophical outlook about the world, persona, and through their journey and the clashes they have with the antagonist, who has an opposite philosophical outlook, they begin to understand the lie they tell themselves. This is a rationalization they use to hide from what they need to learn about themselves, the shadow, in order to refine their philosophical outlook to make a better one, the self. So this refinement could be seen as an improvement in how the main character mitigates their persona and shadow to create the self. Beyond the basic archetypes are a whole range of others. It's too much to cover in this video, but here are a few that we typically see in many stories. The hero. This archetype embodies power and appears as the savior and conqueror of evil, striving against adversity. So think Neo from The Matrix, or any main character from every Marvel movie. The trickster or clown. This kind of character symbolizes the consciousness that tends to disrupt, often acting out the unconscious desires of the other archetypes. A great example would be Alan, the offbeat brother-in-law from The Hangover, who says and does ridiculous things, but who also speaks the truth in what's on everyone's mind deep down inside. The innocent. This archetype wants to be happy and strives for a simple, utopian life. They dream of a good one and living it authentically without any pretenses. This is the archetype of the main character Star from American Honey, which I highly recommend people watch. It's a true masterpiece. The rebel. This is a character who resists the status quo and advocates for drastic revolutionary change. They find fulfillment in overthrowing what they perceive to be an oppressive system. So think John Keating from Dead Poets Society, or Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade from Scent of a Woman. The everyman, also known as the orphan. This archetype represents the average person. They want to fit in and belong, fearing to be left out or to stand out from the crowd. Think Scotty Smalls from The Sandlot, or Carl Allen from Yes Man. The sage. This archetype seeks the truth and values wisdom. The sage looks for answers and can often play the role of a mentor or advisor. Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars and Gandalf from Lord of the Rings are great examples of this archetype. Again, there are a whole bunch of others, but for the sake of brevity, I just listed some of the more interesting ones. Check out the link in the description for a full list. So that's going to do it for part 1 of this video. Next time we'll cover B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning and how it can be used to build or destroy your characters through punishment and reward. We'll also go over Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it can be used to develop your characters when faced with a situation where they're forced to adapt and survive. Thanks for checking this out, and if you want to see more in your feed, be sure to like and subscribe. As always, best of luck in your creative endeavors.